I remember the laughter that echoed through the room, ringing harsh and unsettling in my young ears. It was my parents, jesting about me, their own daughter. They called me a monster, their voices laced with a humor I couldn't understand. It was supposed to be a joke, a cruel one, which only they found amusing. My grandparents, who were present during this exchange, were visibly shocked. Their faces hardened with disapproval at the harsh words flung so carelessly in my direction. As the laughter died down, the air grew tense, and after what felt like an eternity, my grandparents finally spoke. "Then we'll take her in," they declared with a firmness that left no room for argument. My grandmother's hand tightened around mine, offering warmth and a promise of safety as tears streaked down my face. From that day, I never set foot in that house again. It was my grandparents who welcomed me into their home, a haven of peace and love where I was allowed to grow without the shadow of ridicule. Life with them was calm and nurturing, a stark contrast to the volatile environment of my parents' house. My grandparents built a new house, one filled with memories of love and acceptance, not the painful echoes of the past. Years passed, and just as I was settling into a routine of tranquility and contentment, an unexpected encounter shook my newfound peace. One day, standing in front of the grand house my grandparents had built, were two figures dressed in ragged clothes, their faces hard and mean. Recognition dawned on me slowly but unmistakably. They were my parents. The very ones who had abandoned me, now standing on my doorstep, smirking as if they owned the place. "You're living in quite a big house here," they remarked casually, as though commenting on the weather. "It was hard to find this place. Won't you let us live here? The old house has become too cramped for us." Their audacity was staggering. After everything, they had the gall to show up and ask for a place in my sanctuary. I responded with a clarity and strength I had never felt during my childhood. "How selfish can you be? I can't believe it." After calling me a monster and all sorts of things, then abandoning me without a second thought. "Leave right now. This is trespassing." The surprise on their faces was almost comical. I was no longer the scared child they had left behind. I was Mirabelle Cedra, a 22-year-old woman who had carved out a peaceful life in beauty and care, far removed from their toxic influence. As they stood there, probably expecting a different reaction, I reached for the emergency button that would alert the security company. I wasn't afraid anymore. The fear that once gripped my heart every time I faced their harsh words or colder silences had transformed into a resolute strength. Reflecting on my past, it became clear that the real tragedy of my life wasn't the burned scar that marked my face, a painful reminder of an accident with boiling water. No, the true misfortune was having been born to those who could not appreciate the beauty of their own child beyond the superficial. My childhood memories were clouded with hunger and neglect, a reflection of my parents' inability to provide stability or affection. My father was a man who couldn't hold a job, given to gambling his days away, while my mother prided herself on past admirations, unable to commit to her responsibilities. This realization of my past, coupled with the confrontation at my doorstep, solidified a new understanding within me. I had outgrown the painful labels and had built a life worth living, surrounded by those who truly cared. Growing up in a household where the bare essentials were a luxury, I became accustomed to the routine of making instant meals for myself. Each day was the same, pouring hot water into packets of instant soup or mashed potatoes, the only variety I knew. This was my childhood, a constant battle with hunger and neglect, a reality for a child whose parents were more interested in the fleeting excitement of gambling than in parenting. The turning point came unexpectedly when I was in the 4th grade. During a rare outing to the supermarket with my mom, we encountered one of her old acquaintances. The woman, after chatting for a while, turned her attention to me. Her surprise at seeing me was genuine as she exclaimed, "My goodness, your daughter, she's grown so much and is so cute. She looks just like a model." The pride that flashed across my mom's face at those words was something I had rarely seen directed towards me. It seemed that the woman's comment had sparked a new idea in her mind. After a brief discussion with my dad, my life took a sharp turn. Suddenly, I was registered at a child model agency. Auditions came and went, and soon, I found myself modeling for a local medical store's children's clothing line and appearing in commercials for a local TV station. The influx of money from my modeling changed everything at home. Our diet improved from mere instant meals to more lavish, flavorful dishes. My parents, who had previously adorned themselves and our home in the bare minimum, now sported brand names. Their attitude towards me transformed overnight from indifferent and uninterested to seemingly kind and attentive. They smiled at me, and for a moment, I felt a genuine sense of family happiness. The feeling of my parents being pleased made me happier than I had ever been. However, this newfound happiness was short-lived. As my popularity as a child model grew, so did the demands of my career. My parents, thrilled with the success and the lifestyle it afforded them, continued to pile on more work. School events, homework, and even basic friendships were pushed aside to accommodate my burgeoning schedule. I barely had time to be a child, much less a student. My body, small and not meant for such relentless pace, grew tired. Yet, I believed that this was the path to keeping my parents happy, so I pushed myself to the limits, desperate to maintain the smiles on their faces. At the same time, my parents' lifestyle became increasingly luxurious. They bought a new car, started going on vacations to tourist spots across the country, living a life of leisure that was funded by my efforts. Of course, I could never join them, I was too busy working. As they indulged in their travels and luxuries, I was left behind, the young face of advertisements, missing out on my childhood, dedicated to a camera and the next shoot, all while accumulating exhaustion and a growing sense of isolation. My days had become a monotonous cycle: travel to the set alone, complete the shoot, and then immediately rush to the next one. The luxurious family meals that once marked our evenings had faded away, replaced once again by solitary instant meals. This return to my earlier life of simplicity, but now tinged with sadness and isolation, weighed heavily on me. One evening, feeling particularly overwhelmed, I approached my parents. "Hey, Mom, Dad, can I take a break from work? I want to go to school and eat meals together again," I muttered, hopeful yet anxious about their response. Their reaction was swift and dismissive. "What are you talking about? This is the prime time to earn money. Work is more important than school. Don't worry, Mirabelle, we're enjoying and making good use of the money you're earning. Work is what you should be focusing on." Their words were like a cold splash of reality. It was clear, their affection was conditional, tied not to me, their daughter, but to the income one generated. They saw me not as a child to cherish, but as a golden goose, an investment that needed to keep giving returns. Despite my exhaustion, my routine remained unchanged. By the 6th grade, I was constantly tired, my body and mind pushed to their limits. Then, during a brief moment on set, a mishap occurred that would alter the course of my life dramatically. I was preparing instant soup in the studio's kitchen, just as I had done countless times before. Fatigue from the relentless schedule had taken its toll, and as I handled the kettle, my grip faltered due to sleep deprivation. I stumbled, and the boiling water splashed over me. The pain was immediate and searing. "It's hot, someone help me!" I screamed, the pain unbearable. The filming crew acted quickly, rushing me to the hospital. By the time my treatments were done, my parents arrived, looking anxious and distressed. The accident had left severe burns on my face, requiring me to spend weeks wrapped in bandages, with frequent hospital visits for treatment. The day came when the bandages were to be removed, and my parents watched, their faces etched with worry. As the cloth fell away and I saw my reflection, a ghastly scar stark against my skin, I broke down in tears. My parents' shock was palpable. "Doctor, this isn't Mirabelle's face. You have to fix her up more beautifully," they pleaded desperately. The doctor sighed, his expression one of resigned sympathy. "We did everything we could. Any more treatments would only make it a little lighter at best." Hearing this, my parents turned pale, their dreams of continued profits dissipating. The reality that I could no longer work as a model, the role that had defined my worth in their eyes, was setting in. With the scars, continuing in a job that demanded a specific look was impossible. But what pained me the most wasn't the end of my modeling career or the physical pain I endured, it was witnessing my parents' reaction. Their concern was not for my well-being or the trauma I had suffered. Instead, their immediate worry was about the financial implications. "This was unexpected, and we still have payments left on the new car," they lamented, revealing once again where their true priorities lay. The stark revelation of their indifference to my suffering over their financial concerns was a bitter pill to swallow, leaving me to grapple with the harsh truth of my situation. Coming home from school that day, I felt an eerie calm, a sense of disconnection from the world around me. My steps were mechanical, my mind numb. The house was quiet when I arrived, too quiet. As I approached the living room, the murmur of hushed voices reached my ears. My parents hadn't realized I was home yet. Driven by a strange compulsion, I hid, listening from the shadows, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm so disappointed in her," I heard my dad's voice, laden with a mix of frustration. "I thought she'd bring in more money. Now she's just a leech, costing us for food and school. Yeah, we even thought about getting her into night work, but with that face, that's out of the question. Such a waste. But we still have the car loan and other debts, so she'll have to work something. Maybe a paper route. That won't make much money. She's worthless now. Might as well dump her somewhere. Maybe if we leave her in front of a foster care, someone will pick her up." Their words cut through me like knives. The pain of the burned scars was nothing compared to the agony of hearing my own parents devalue me so cruelly. I had been relieved to escape the relentless schedule of modeling, hoping for a semblance of a normal childhood, going to school, studying, playing with friends. But they didn't care about my feelings or well-being. They were even contemplating abandoning me. As I stood there, frozen, a floorboard creaked under my weight. The sudden noise betrayed my presence. My parents emerged from the living room, their expressions cold and resigned. "You heard us. Well, that makes things easier. Leave this house. That's right, supporting you is too much now. We can finally breathe easier." The shock of their words was palpable. Around me, the world seemed to stop. Kids my age were supposed to live with caring parents, enjoy warm home-cooked meals, revel in studying, sports, and hanging out with friends. Instead, I was treated like a tool, used and discarded when no longer useful. Tears welled up, blurring my vision, but my mother's voice sliced through the moment. "Crying is useless. Do you understand what's your answer to me?" Before I could muster a response, a miracle or perhaps a saving grace intervened. The front door swung open, and two familiar figures entered. They were an elderly couple, concerned and gentle. Their presence felt like a beacon of hope in my despair. "We were worried and thought we'd check in," the elderly man said, his voice filled with warmth and concern. My father grunted, his displeasure evident. "What, Dad, Mom, why are you here?" Their arrival was unexpected but desperately needed. In that moment, surrounded by the coldness of my parents and the warmth of my grandparents, I stood speechless, grappling with the stark contrast of what family could mean. My grandparents' presence offered a glimpse of compassion that I hadn't felt from my parents in what seemed like forever, raising a flurry of emotions and questions about what would happen next. I recognized them immediately the moment they walked through the door. Though we had rarely met, they were unmistakably my paternal grandparents. Their presence was a stark contrast to the life I had known with my parents. I had heard stories about the strained relationship between them and my father. He was born into a wealthy family, the only son, and it seemed the privileges of his upbringing led him astray rather than shaping him. Influenced by bad friends at school, he veered off the path expected of him, delving into trouble and often ending up in the hands of the police. Despite my grandparents' best efforts, he never changed. As an adult, he spent his days lingering in bars and nightclubs, until he married my mother, a hostess, much to my grandfather's disapproval. Their union only deepened the rift, eventually leading to them being kicked out of the family home. Since that decisive moment, my grandparents hadn't been very active in our lives, yet standing there, it was clear they still cared deeply for me, their granddaughter. "Grandma, Grandpa," I murmured as they looked at me with tender eyes. We saw Mirabelle in a clothing store flyer and were surprised, my grandmother explained. We hadn't heard anything from Wade and were worried about how you were doing. Wade, you're the worst. Kicking her out. No, you've never changed, my grandfather scolded my father, his voice thick with disappointment. And Ellie, what kind of adults make their child work and then discard her when she's no longer useful? What are you thinking? My father's annoyance was palpable as he faced his parents' criticism. Meanwhile, my mother giggled dismissively, retorting, well, it can't be helped. Mirabelle's got no more value with a face like that. Don't be ridiculous, my grandfather countered sharply. She isn't just some tool. Have you not noticed how skinny she is? And you barely feed her properly. And what about this bruise on her face? Was that an accident? Poor thing, you two are unfit parents, ganging up on a child with such cruelty. Shame on you. As they scolded, my grandparents enveloped me in a hug, a rare embrace that brought unexpected tears to my eyes. The warmth of their touch was something I had scarcely known. My mother, unfazed and cruel, twisted her face into a sneer. If we're unfit parents, then isn't she an unfit child? She's only good for her face. It was her duty to earn money with that face and give it back to us. In this world, it's all about looks, you know. If you have a good face, you can make money. But with her turning ugly, she's worthless, good for nothing. My grandparents were enraged by her words. How dare you say such things? We don't need a monster of a daughter, my parents said, laughing cruelly, not realizing or caring about the impact of their words. My grandparents, stunned and trembling with rage, finally managed to say, then we'll take her in. My grandmother squeezed my hand tightly as she cried. From that day on, I never returned to that house. The emotional wounds inflicted by my parents' rejection and cruelty had cut deep, but now, with my grandparents, I had a chance to heal, to find a place where I was valued not for my appearance, but for who I was inside. Their unconditional support was my new foundation, a stark contrast to the conditional love I had known. After my grandparents took me in, life began to change in ways I never imagined. My grandmother, with her kind heart and skilled hands, made sure I was well fed and warm, cooking delicious meals that nourished my body and soul. Wrapped in the warmth of soft blankets each night, I finally felt safe. It was the perfect time for a fresh start, so I enrolled in a middle school near my grandparents' home. At first, I lagged behind in my studies due to the years focused on modeling rather than learning. However, my grandmother arranged for a tutor, who was like a gardener, patiently nurturing a wilted plant back to health. Under his guidance, I caught up quickly. My academic progress was just one part of reclaiming my childhood. I also yearned to make friends and experience the carefree joy that had been absent from my early years. However, the burned scars on my face were a constant reminder of my past, and I worried they would mark me as different or unlikable. My grandparents, ever supportive, introduced me to Mary, a makeup artist with the gentle touch of an artist bringing a canvas to life. After she worked her magic, I looked in the mirror and saw not scars, but a smiling, confident girl. See, you look beautiful now. It's okay, have confidence, Mary encouraged, helping me to see beyond my physical appearance. Emboldened by her words, I found myself stepping out of the shadow of my former life. I became more vocal in class, unafraid to express my opinions or share my thoughts. Friends gathered around, drawn not to a perfect facade but to the genuine, joyful person I was becoming. Watching me, my grandparents seemed to glow with pride, content in the knowledge that they had altered the course of my life for the better. Now, 10 years later, I am an adult with a career, living a life once unimaginable. The scars on my face have faded, thanks almost to my makeup skills that grew from Mary's initial lessons. My grandparents are still thriving, having built a new home to replace our old one. Despite their wealth, including several apartments generating rental income, they live modestly. They have steadfastly refused to support my father financially, focusing instead on using their resources for charitable causes and ensuring a secure future for us. One night, while the quiet hum of the evening settled around our new 18,000 square foot home, I overheard my grandparents discussing something troubling. A suspicious figure had been spotted lurking near our property, dressed in ragged clothes, perhaps a beggar or a lost soul in distress. Their concern was palpable, and it echoed my own fears. The safety and peace we had built were suddenly feeling threatened, and I wondered about the intentions of this mysterious visitor lurking in the shadows of our newfound happiness. As I went outside to inspect, the unease in my heart grew. Our neighborhood was typically a bastion of tranquility, so the presence of these people was all the more jarring. The sight that greeted me confirmed my grandparents' concerns: a family in shabby clothes, huddled against the wall of our house. A middle-aged man and woman with 2 young girls, who must be their children, murmured quietly among themselves. Their presence was disconcerting, and a pang of annoyance struck me. They were loitering around someone's home without any regard. Then, unexpectedly, a shout broke through the evening air: "Mirabelle!" Why did these people know my name? Apprehensive and suspicious, I asked, "Who are you?" The response came in a familiar, hauntingly sweet voice: "Oh Mirabelle, have you forgotten us? It's your mom and dad." Upon closer inspection, the recognition dawned: these were indeed my parents. They looked older, more worn, their faces gaunt from years I hadn't seen them. "You're living in such a big house now." "It was hard to find this place," my father said with a smirk, as the 2 girls stood silently beside him. One looked to be about middle school age, the other in elementary school, both strikingly beautiful. Could these really be my sisters? The thought was overwhelming. My father continued: "After you left, our family grew and our house became too small. So we were hoping you'd let us live here." The audacity of his request, after all that had happened, after calling me a monster and abandoning me, was staggering. In a loud voice, filled with all the pent-up frustration of the years, I yelled back: "How selfish can you be? I can't believe it. After calling me a monster and all sorts of things, then abandoning me without a second thought. Go back home now." My parents seemed taken aback by my response. It felt surreal, almost like a dream, standing there, no longer the frightened child, but a strong, confident woman. As they stood there, my father tried to appeal to some misplaced familial obligation: "Mirabelle, how can you say that to your parents? I thought only your face was ugly, but it turns out your heart is too." "You're no parents of mine," I retorted sharply, my voice steady and resolute. At that moment, the front door opened, and my grandparents appeared, drawn by the noise. "Wade, Ellie," my grandmother called out, her voice a mixture of shock and sternness. "Grandma, Grandpa, these people suddenly showed up. It's unbelievable, they come out of nowhere now," I explained quickly. Before I could finish, my father interrupted, desperately trying to assert some right. "What are you talking about, Mirabelle? This is my parents' house. We have the right to live here." My grandfather, weary and disheartened by the sight of his son, responded as if he were lecturing a misbehaving child, yet his voice carried the weight of finality and a deep-seated disappointment. The air thickened with tension as the confrontation unfolded, each word laden with the weight of years and the heartbreak of a family torn apart by selfishness and neglect. As I listened to Amelia and Lisa share their story at the cafe, the weight of their plight settled heavily on me. They were just children, thrust into a role similar to the one I had been forced to play. Amelia, the older one, spoke in hushed tones, her voice occasionally trembling. Lisa, much younger, clung to her sister, her eyes wide and fearful. "You're not their biological children?" I asked for clarification, my suspicions about my parents' motives growing clearer. Amelia shook her head. "No, we were taken from foster care." The bitterness in her voice was palpable. She continued, detailing their life with my parents. "They started working for a while after adopting us, but they couldn't stick to any job. They thought they could make money off us by making us work as child actors and baby models, saying, 'You only have your looks going for you.' It was almost like brainwashing." Lisa added in a small voice, "But it didn't work out. We didn't make as much money as they wanted, and they spent everything they earned anyway. They were always struggling financially." Their story unfolded, a grim mirror of my own past experiences. My parents had not changed, they merely replicated their abusive patterns with Amelia and Lisa, hoping to replace me as their source of income. When that failed, they returned to our house, driven by desperation. Hearing all this, a mix of anger and sorrow welled up inside me. These girls had suffered like I had, manipulated into believing they were nothing more than a means to an end. It was heart-wrenching to see another generation of children ensnared by my parents' selfish schemes. "We ran away from that house," Amelia finally said, her voice a whisper. "We have nowhere else to go." I paused, taking in the gravity of their situation. For a moment, I considered my options. Despite my reservations about any connection to my parents, these were innocent children caught in a terrible situation. I couldn't just turn them away. "Okay," I said slowly, "let's figure out what we can do to help you." I decided to contact a local child protection agency and explain the situation. While I didn't invite them to live with us immediately, I knew I had to take some responsibility to ensure their safety. We discussed temporary arrangements and set up a meeting with the agency to explore long-term solutions. As I watched Amelia and Lisa, their hopeful eyes looking up at me, I realized that this was more than just a chance encounter. It was an opportunity to prevent my parents from harming anyone else. Despite the complexities of my feelings toward my parents, helping Amelia and Lisa felt like correcting a part of my past, a chance to do right by these innocent children who had suffered from the same hands that once tormented me. This meeting, initially filled with tension and uncertainty, turned into a commitment. I was determined to help them find a safe place, a sanctuary where they could grow up without the shadow of exploitation hanging over them. With determination in our hearts, we approached the local police station the following morning. I explained to the officers every detail of my parents' neglect and exploitation of Amelia and Lisa. My grandparents stood by me, their expressions a mix of sorrow and resolve. It was clear that the welfare of these children was now our primary concern, and we were united in ensuring their safety. The police were attentive and sympathetic. They took notes diligently as I recounted the years of my own upbringing under the same neglectful watch of my parents, paralleling the plight of Amelia and Lisa. It was a painful story to tell, one filled with memories I had long tried to suppress. The officers assured us that they would investigate immediately, recognizing the urgency and the potential danger the girls were in, especially with my parents out of the country and unresponsive. Amelia and Lisa, having spent the night at our house, seemed to find solace in the stability and warmth it offered. My grandmother, ever the nurturing figure, had prepared a breakfast that morning that was rich and comforting, much like the meals she had lovingly made for me during my own healing years ago. Both girls, now free from the immediate burden of hunger and fear, were visibly more relaxed, yet the shadows of their recent hardships lingered in their eyes. After leaving the police station, we drove to my parents' house, the place I once called home. The sight that greeted us was dismal. The house was in a state of neglect, clutter and dust had accumulated, and it felt abandoned, a stark contrast to the vibrant home I now shared with my grandparents. It was a visual testament to my parents' continuous disregard for anything other than their own desires. My grandmother sighed deeply as we surveyed the chaos. "Nothing has changed," she muttered, her voice tinged with sadness and disgust. "Taking in children for the sake of money when they can't even raise them. Unbelievable." Our collective anger and frustration at the situation were palpable. We couldn't allow this cycle of neglect and exploitation to continue. Not only did we need to ensure Amelia and Lisa's well-being, but we also had to prevent my parents from possibly ensnaring any more innocent lives in their selfish schemes. The police began their investigation, and we were in constant communication with them, providing any additional information that could help build the case against my parents. Meanwhile, my grandparents and I discussed long-term plans for Amelia and Lisa. The possibility of legally adopting them was brought up, considering that my grandparents and I were more than willing to provide them with a stable, loving home, a stark contrast to the instability they had known. As we navigated these complex emotional and legal waters, I found a new purpose. Protecting Amelia and Lisa not only gave me a chance to rectify the injustices of my own past, but also to ensure a brighter future for these vulnerable, deserving children. My grandparents' support was unwavering, their presence a constant source of strength and love. Together, we were determined to fight for these girls, to give them the childhood they deserved, free from exploitation and filled with genuine care and support. Continue to provide a stable and loving home for Amelia and Lisa. Watching my parents being led away by the police was a mixture of relief and bitterness. Relief, because no longer could they harm anyone with their selfish actions. Bitterness, because the scars they left on their children were deep and would take time to heal. As they were taken into custody, I reflected on the entire journey. From the moment I was taken in by my grandparents to finding my parents on our doorstep with Amelia and Lisa in tow, it had been a whirlwind of emotions and challenges. Now, standing in the police station, watching the officers process my parents, I realized how crucial our intervention had been. Amelia and Lisa, standing close by, clung to each other, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and relief. I put an arm around each, pulling them close, a silent promise of protection and care. In the following weeks, the legal proceedings took their course. My parents were charged with parental neglect and the abuse of the adoption system. Their sentencing to 5 years in prison was a testament to the severity of their actions. In court, they issued what seemed like a hollow apology to the children. Whether it was genuine remorse or just another attempt to manipulate public perception was hard to tell. Their defiant attitude in prison only further cemented my belief that their apologies were merely performative. The news of their sentencing became a sensational story, attracting journalists and media outlets. One reporter, who visited them for an interview, relayed back to me that my parents had demanded money for their stories. Even in prison, trapped by the consequences of their own greed, they continued to seek profit from their situation. This revelation was disheartening but not surprising. It was a stark reminder of the depth of their selfishness and the unlikelihood of a genuine change in their character. As time passed, my focus shifted entirely to Amelia and Lisa. The girls started attending school regularly, their dark circles faded with proper nutrition and care, and they began to smile more. My grandparents and I made sure they felt part of our family, a sharp contrast to the exploitation they had experienced. We worked with therapists to help them overcome the trauma, and slowly, they started to engage more with the world around them, making friends and discovering their interests. Seeing Amelia and Lisa thrive was a profound comfort. It reassured me that despite the darkness we had faced, there was light and hope ahead. The community around us was supportive, often expressing admiration for the courage it took to change the girls' fate. All I can do now is ensure that Amelia and Lisa grow up knowing they are loved and valued, not for what they can provide, but for who they are. They have already shown incredible resilience and strength. As for my parents, I hope that their time in prison serves as a period of reflection, although I remain cautious about the potential for real change. My primary concern is no longer what becomes of them, but what future Amelia, Lisa, and I can build together. Amelia and Lisa, having been placed with a kind foster family, seemed to be adjusting well, a stark contrast to the instability they had endured. Before they left to start this new chapter, I had a heartfelt conversation with them. It was important for me to impart some wisdom, something to guide them as they moved forward. You might have heard a lot of terrible things from my parents, but it's best to forget, I told them gently. What truly matters isn't your appearance, it's your heart. It's important to have compassion for others, to keep looking forward and not give up, no matter what. If you do, someday someone will surely take notice, just like my grandparents noticed and rescued me from that hellish life. The first time I met Amelia and Lisa, their faces were etched with the gloom of their experiences. But now, as they were about to embark on a new journey, there was a noticeable change. They were beginning to regain that inherent sparkle that all children should have. Their lifestyle under my parents' care had caused some skin issues, but I had shared some basic skincare tips with them, just some simple moisturizer and lip balm. It was nothing fancy, but for children, it was enough to make a significant difference. Their reactions when they saw their reflections post the little makeover were priceless. "Wow, Mirabelle, you're amazing, thank you," Amelia had exclaimed, her eyes wide with surprise. Seeing them so happy, I saw a reflection of. I remembered how transformative and empowering good skincare and makeup had been for me during my recovery. Now, as a professional makeup artist, I found profound fulfillment in using my skills to uplift others, especially children like Amelia and Lisa who had been through so much. My hope for them was simple yet deep, to look forward and walk confidently into whatever the future held. Beside me, my grandfather smiled kindly, a silent acknowledgement of the journey we had all undertaken together. Despite the absence of parental support in my life, my grandparents had filled that void with nothing but love and stability. The thought of their unwavering support filled me with an immense sense of gratitude and happiness. Turning to my smiling grandparents, I felt a surge of affection and appreciation. "Please live a long life," I said, my voice thick with emotion. My grandmother laughed in response, her eyes twinkling with mirth. "Of course," she replied warmly. My grandfather simply nodded, his smile a gentle beacon of agreement. As I stood there with them, reflecting on the past and looking forward to the future, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. My journey had been fraught with challenges, but it had led me to a place of healing and purpose. Now, as Amelia and Lisa ventured into their new lives, I felt confident that they too would find their path to happiness and fulfillment, just as I had, with the love and guidance of those